So I was kind of thinking what to talk about. I tend to talk a little bit off the top of my head with a few notes, but probably a lot of you coming to a workshop like this are interested in the idea of embodiment. Yeah, who's heard of this concept in recent years? Hands up. Yeah, embodiment. It's very popular buzzword in the last kind of 4 or 5 years, I think. And also talking a little bit around the Western mind. Because the Western mind's kind of interesting. I've been living outside the West for like the last 3 years in Ukraine, Mexico, Georgia, now in Turkey, Lebanon a little bit as well. And realizing that other people don't necessarily see the world in the way that Westerners do. And it's a bit different. And in 2020, a famous professor at Harvard wrote this book. Maybe some of you heard of it. It was called The Weirdest People in the World. Anybody heard of it? No. You mean? Well, it was famous in kind of popular anthropology. And he had the word weird. It was like in big bold letters. His name was Joseph Heinrich, something like that, Harvard guy. And he made the word weird stand for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And that but we were different people in a sense, leaders and cultural leaders in many ways, and more wealthy, higher GDP than most of the other people in the world who are living more in a kind of extended family patriarchal structure, in my experience. And actually, before I get on to just talking a little bit about how Westerners learned to think about the world the way they did and why embodiment has become a huge issue, it's like something that's really useful to know. But I don't think they tell you in school. I mean, I haven't been to school for a long time. But is that your DNA, we're a product of biological evolution. With natural selection, everyone knows that, tends to be calibrated for a lifespan of about 40 years. That's its optimal age range. If we take our little proto-person here, the reason it's 40 years is because our ancestors mostly had babies around average of age 20, and then we had to look after the babies until they were ready to have babies themselves, which is another kind of 20 years roughly on average. And so natural selection kind of calibrated us for a 40-year lifespan. And obviously it doesn't, it's not like your nervous system, your immune system, lymph, and all these functions in your body just say, okay, 40 years is up, I'm out of here. But they start to kind of decline a bit and go down. And generally, if you want to have a good life up into your 60s, 70s, 80s, then you're going to need to take increasing responsibility for that. In a sense, the first 40 years are kind of given to you by your DNA, from natural selection, whatever. That's kind of given to you. But after that, it becomes, all those processes in your body start to wind down a little bit. They're not working quite as well. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it. Bits of your brain, the muscle system, so it's just, it'll feed into a little bit what I'm going to say, but it's also useful to be aware of that. That after 40, it becomes increasingly up to you to do the work that you personally need to stay healthy, mentally and physically. That's just one of the things with DNA. And then, what I want to talk a little bit about is, like back about in the 17th century and 18th century, I'm going to look a little bit at why Westerners think about things the way that they do. And there was a couple of very famous philosophers who came around, one out of France, one out of Germany. I think end of 17th century, René Descartes. Anybody heard of René Descartes? Yeah. And it's not like you need to massively study philosophy to understand this shit, but it's just that these guys were so influential that they ended up steering, or their ideas became completely absorbed into Western society as it developed through the 18th, 19th, 20th centuries. And René Descartes did this thing. He was French. Je pense, donc je suis. I think, therefore I am. Probably heard of it. This concept. So the concept that he kind of introduced, was that thinking is what denotes who we are. Our whole being, our personality is denoted around the fact that we think. And we can think about ourselves. We can give ourselves attributes. I am we can construct a personality for ourselves based around the kind of ideas, around memes. You know, I am this kind of person, I'm this age old, I like these kind of foods and drinks and this kind of music, and those kind of people attract me, those kind of don't, and this is this. You know, I can create, basically I can start to create, like, from my mind, kind of increasingly access to abstract layers, you know? And as Descartes' idea started to become entrenched in Western philosophy and then Western thought and Western culture and everything, we learned to understand that thinking, you know, could create this sense of my personality and the attributes that we could assign to ourselves. A little bit after Descartes, country next door, Germany, is a bloke called Immanuel Kant. Maybe you heard of him, yeah, a few. And he really developed the idea of time. Time was super important to Kant. He was like 1780s or something like this. And, you know, because out in the world, if you imagine before this era, like, you know, like in the sort of, not a bit after the Dark Ages and shit, but just like in the 1700s, 1600s, the concept of time, and before then, was quite different. Time really was just like the idea, it's like natural cycles going on around you. Like, for example, you know, we live on a planet and it's turning around, which gives us day and night. You know, it's either where we are is either facing the sun or away from it. So you have, that's the cycle of the day. That planet's also going around a big sun, which gives us seasons and the idea of a year. And the moon is kind of going up and down, and it's getting full and getting smaller, which gives us the idea of a month. You know, so that was how, before then, time was kind of understood like that. Or from looking at a tree and it's kind of young and then it's growing older and getting big and then it's kind of declining and giving out seeds and then dying. You know, so you had processes, you had periodicity, they would call it. You know, things that go round in a circle. And humans, of course, you know, we grow old and then we die. We have babies or not, but we live when we're up. And he introduced the idea of time, and so it became like an abstract concept in the mind. And this, because it became such a powerful idea and such a useful idea, that we started to really model ourselves as like, okay, like living inside of me is this kind of inner observer or experiencer of life, who's experiencing time and has got attributes that he can assign to, or she can assign to herself. You know, this idea of personality, of being someone living in your mind, looking out at the world. And this was the kind of how Westerners over time, because, you know, these philosophers weren't like, you know, running the whole culture. They just had ideas, and then those ideas became just dominant around that area of the world, particularly in Europe, basically. So slowly this notion of an inner self that's got attributes and abstractions and is existing in time, you know, in little blocks and chunks, came along. Can you follow that so far? It's a little bit weird, I know. Yeah?
Yeah.
Do ask a question if you want to, it's fine. Meanwhile in Europe, something kind of interesting was also happening in this time around the 17th century. In fact, centred originally on Britain, but 18th century, in the 1700s. Anybody have an idea what that was in Europe? In Britain, what started happening around the 1800s, 1700s?
Industrialization.
Yeah. Industrial capitalism kind of started in Britain, I think in the north, in fact, actually. One of the interesting things they don't really tell you about capitalism is very interesting in the sense that, I could try and draw Britain, I don't bother. Imagine there's like some dude who's running, it's the middle of the 18th century, he's running a mill or a factory, maybe he's called Mr. Arkwright or something, you know, kind of wears a cap, this kind of thing in the Midlands somewhere. And he's chugging along, he's got a few employees from the local towns, and he's running his mill. And some, you know, after a 20-day period, he's produced some kind of goods and he's selling them. And what happened for our Mr. Arkwright dude, at some point he thought, well, I'm making profit out of this. It cost me a certain amount to make this stuff. I've got some profit. What I'm going to do is, instead of like, you know, buying myself a really flash horse and cart, or some kind of not getting in with the local nobility and make myself look really cool, or whatever. Instead of doing that, I'm gonna invest that money, that profit, back into my mill, back into my factory. And at that point, something very interesting was created, which is like what's called in systems theory or cybernetics, which sounds complicated, but you don't really need to know about that, a positive feedback loop. What happened was, because his factory, hypothetical factory, he was reinvesting the money in new machinery or getting more people in or making his factory a bit more efficient in some way, he made more profit. And with the more profit that he made compared to the other mills, he could expand and reinvest that, make more, take over other mills maybe, his mates, his rivals. And that's what's called a positive feedback loop, not positive in the sense of good, but it's with each cycle, it generates more. So this was the birth of industrial capitalism, basically, just on purely this is what really happened. But the action of reinvesting your profit back in your business gave you more power. So you could maybe build a bigger factory. Maybe some scientists would invent something and you could use that as machinery. You could employ more people. And slowly you created this capacity to expand and expand. So from Britain, the Industrial Revolution slowly kind of took over Europe, then America came along and gradually kind of just took more and more power to itself. And basically it just kept on expanding. And these positive feedback loops like this are really rare, actually. Mostly what the human body does is what's called a negative feedback loop, which is not like a bad thing, it's just what they call it, which is essentially, it tries to maintain homeostasis. Your body is like a million little thermostats inside, and they're all monitoring things. And when something's a little bit off, it brings it back, constantly maintains homeostasis. So it's like, I haven't eaten anything for 12 hours or whatever, and my body energy is getting a bit low, my blood sugar. I get this sensation of hunger. Get some food, brings my blood sugar back to the normal range, whatever. I'm thirsty, all these systems inside the body. It's like thousands of little thermostats going along, trying to bring us back into homeostasis. It's called negative feedback loop. It goes round and round and round. This one, self-reinforcing feedback loop. It's each turn, it's creating more and more and more. And these two things kind of interacted really with this human who's now kind of, it's kind of exciting getting these abstract layers of thinking that we can think about, and this idea of time. We can give some of our time to Mr. Arkwright's factory or his descendants, work in the factory, and he wants us to work 12 hours a day, and then we can get together and push back and say, create a union and say, no bollocks, Mr. Arkwright, we're only working 8 hours a day. This kind of capitalism, socialism dynamic kicks off. But what's basically happening over the whole of the 18th and 19th centuries in Europe is people are becoming a bit more like machines, basically. They're kind of getting a bit robotic. You've got this idea of time, you're splitting the day up into these kind of chunks, you're giving your time to work for a factory or whatever system, and then they're giving you money, and then with the money you buy the stuff, or stuff that the factories or other factories do, and then you have a little bit of free time. And you kind of, so this thing is expanding, and meanwhile, industrial capitalism, forgetting the 20th century, it's kind of, Europe has used its power and influence and the GDP it's created from this process to influence politics in other countries, go to Africa and maybe get a load of people to work in some mine, digging up stuff that you need, titanium or whatever thing, and going to different countries, getting the people involved working for you and working in this system. And it's slowly engulfing civilization, basically. That's essentially what's happening, without putting any value judgments on it. And I think for a long time it's been pretty positive. And as it does that, it feeds this tendency. Slowly we become more abstract layers of thinking, This abstraction's also been useful. It's enabled us to create more technology. And mathematics and time have been useful, because then the brain can come up, some inventor comes up with all sorts of ideas, makes new materials. These guys can make use of that stuff and make more efficient machinery. And it just keeps, and this has been churning along basically since like 17th century, 18th century Europe. Does it kind of make sense a bit? Yeah. And probably somewhere there was like an optimal level of development, you know, like maybe somewhere in the second half of the last century or whatever. You know, we had this abstract thinking, and our lives were getting better because we were creating GDP with our work, and we could buy new stuff and make our houses like better. We could make water really clean so loads of babies didn't die, and develop, you know, vaccines and whatever, and have lots of ideas about culture, you know, that guys in like Stone Age would never have had, you know, be really into different types of music, be really creative, do all sorts of things, all this abstract ability for abstract thought that we've got, which is increasing. But because no one is running any of this shit, you know, it's just happening in the world as a kind of organic process, what's happened is it's just kept going. You know, there isn't anyone who can say, okay, now we've got to kind of optimal development and we don't want to keep going with just, you know, sucking more materials into world capitalism and just churning this thing around, getting more people working in factories, you know, and the idea they're going to trickle down and get good stuff. You know, the climate's starting to break down a little bit, people are getting problems. One of the problems of developing abstract thinking and continuing to get another layer on it is that the sense of the body gets shut down, both on the level of how much we can feel our body, and we tend to regard our body, instead of being this kind of exciting thing that we can move around and enjoy and get pleasure from, it's more like, okay, it's like a little vehicle that can carry my mind around, you know, and it's kind of like a battery, you know, it's like a battery just to keep my mind going, you know, it's like this kind of robotic, slowly increasingly robotic self that's kind of emerging, you know. And so what's happened, you know, now, and we've got the internet now, is this process is just continuing and churning along. No one's over it, no one's really controlling it in any way. It's kind of, in a sense, captured certain governments a little bit, you know, with lobbying or whatever. And humans are still going into more and more abstract layers. Rise of the internet in the 1990s, you know, static web, and then particularly around 2008, Web 2 was like social media, Facebook, interactive pages. You know, you just start to create more and more abstract layers. You know, so people become more and more abstracted from the sense of the body to a point where they can barely feel their body anymore. Everything is just thinking. They're looking at screens. We've got screens, and so the main way of getting excitement now is not so much maybe through, you know, movement, sex, eating things. It's more through looking at exciting images on the screen, which kind of trigger some of your primate brain circuitry, and you know, you're just living in this kind of world of increasing abstractions, more and more complicated personalities. You know, I'm in my 60s, and I started doing alternative stuff quite a long time ago. I dropped out when I was quite young, and you know, I've just seen just how complicated, especially Westerners, have become over the last 20, 30 years. From when we were all basically, you know, wrong or right, we were just kind of going out and just doing shit, whatever happened, you know, and it's become more and more complex being human. You know, it's just become incredibly complex, very, very cerebral, very, very abstract. You know, and it's not necessarily bad, it's become useful, but at the same time, this capacity to feel the body has decreased. And so really, you know, the main thing that we're looking at now, particularly since the arrival of Web 2, Facebook, social media, people spending incredibly high lengths of time on the screen and just getting all their stimulation from the screen, is when you get to about 40, 50, your mental and physical health will be in heavy decline. You know, there's not really strong statistical evidence because it hasn't been around long enough, but it's starting to look like the West in particular, and particularly kind of post-COVID, there's huge mental health problems starting to emerge. There's huge physical health problems starting to emerge. People are bulking out, you know, they're just they're caught up in feedback loops inside their brain's asking for food, they're consuming food, and they're just getting larger, basically. The circuits are getting just distorted, and it serves industrial capitalism because then they will consume more food, you know, Capitalists can have the food industry, fast food industry can employ people who are lobbyists, who will make sure the government doesn't regulate McDonald's too much and that kind of thing. So you're caught up in this thing where what we're looking at potentially in maybe the second half of this century is like major level problems really going on, particularly in the West, but also countries that have kind of been influenced, where our sense of the body is so low and our physical and mental health has declined to the point where it'd be quite an achievement to get to be 60, and still be together. That's kind of, it's a little bit neg, but it's kind of what we're looking at in some ways here in the West. And as the Western culture, industrial culture expands in this machinic way of relating to the world, everything's a transaction, everything's a commodity. Everything that can be commoditized can be sold and bought into a machine, and it serves it to make more and more abstract things that we can identify with, pay money for, and keep us churning along. And yet at the same time, because no one's running this thing, what it's also doing is generating mostly the wealth is directed back to increasingly small numbers of people who need to compete with each other in order to maintain their market position. So if now I'm a big tech entrepreneur, I need to keep reducing my workforce and replacing them with AI or something. Otherwise, if I don't, the guy next door is going to do the same. He's going to replace his. He's going to have more profit. He's going to buy me out, and that's going to be the end of me. It's like this is dominant in capitalist society. You've got two factories who corner the European market for making cement, and they've got a board of directors and CEOs and stuff. And some techie guy, or not techie guy, but some scientist comes along and says, guys, I found this new way of making cement. I mean, it fucks the planet up about 20% more, but it's also 20% cheaper. And so the board meeting, they have a board meeting at factory A, factory B, and they say, look man, this is totally immoral, we can't do this shit, it's going to fuck the planet up. And one guy puts his hand up and says, look, if we don't do it, these guys are going to fucking do it, they're going to make more profit and they're going to buy us out. So you're in this is just another side effect of the system. You're creating situations where this great algorithm, this forward-feeding, self-reinforcing positive feedback loop is just getting out of control, and it's not really an entity or something some people think it is, but it's driving the world in such a way that it's becoming like we've kind of had the good bit and now it's getting a bit more destructive. Which brings us kind of to embodiment, and what can we do about these kind of things? And I mean, because it could be that it all works out okay. It could be that it just somewhere the whole system just decentralizes or something, and it becomes much better, and people have more choice, whatever. And it also could be that it just gets really fucked up, and no one's really living much beyond 50, and everyone's really unhealthy and just looking at screens all the time, and there aren't many jobs around because the people running these huge companies, they can't afford to be too human. They have to do whatever creates profit in order to maintain their position in the market. I know it's all a bit negative, but it kind of gives people an encouragement to do because the real way out of all of this, you're limited. There are people that protest and understand these kind of things, particularly in the States, particularly in the West Coast. There's a lot of people who think about all of this stuff, who've got shit tons of cash from whatever they've done, and they just get involved in all of this kind of thing, but it's really hard to just kind of stop it. It's just not very easy. But what you can do is to start to come back yourself, to start to re-embody, to feel your body more, essentially, we'll mention. And then you can become someone who can, you can go off into abstract realms. I like going off into abstract realms. I can go into some really far out shit, But then I can come back if I need to come back. I'm not trapped up in these higher layers. I can feel my body more. I can feel my heart. I can feel my belly. And so, but with the work, then you can make use of all of this. But without some level of re-embodiment, or we're going to mention just now, we're probably looking at quite a lot of problems, maybe in just the second half of, going up to like 2050, 2060. You know, it's like there could be huge mental health decline. There's also a sign, you know, living outside the West for a while, a lot of non-Western leaders are starting to say, this culture's out of fucking control, man. This shit is out of control. And, you know, partly they feel threatened by it, you know, Putin, Xi, guys in the Middle East or whatever. Their own power base feels threatened by it, you know, but also they think, some of them think like, you know, we need to protect our citizens from this shit. You know, the Chinese stopped kids being all day on TikTok, basically, and its equivalents, you know, from like that shit. In Turkey, where I live, you know, the government's starting to take action saying parents, it's not as powerful as the Chinese government. You could just stop people doing stuff because they're dictators, basically. But in Turkey, they're starting to say, you know, kids at a certain age should not be given 5 hours on these things all day. Even from the limited evidence we have, it's clear that it's not beneficial for them, you know. No one is really over any of this shit, you know, that's the problem. But certain countries are starting to tilt away from the West now and say we need to protect our citizens because no one's really running this shit and it's just going to take over the world and fuck knows what's going to happen. And some of that's positively motivated, trying to protect citizens, and some of it's more, well, I want to keep my dictatorship going and I'm not having these Westerners come in, you know. So. But it brings us to this idea of embodiment, which has kind of come up in the last, it wasn't a word I heard very much before COVID, even being in the scene for quite a while, but it's become a kind of like, I don't know, something that people are really busy with and talk about and see as a solution. But it's useful to understand, you know, when I see embodiment on social media and stuff, often what it is, it's like, you know, I could go to like some bit of Turkey on a mountain and sit there like this looking really peaceful and then put a big sign up on top of the picture saying embodiment and then post that on social media, you know, and people sort of think that's embodiment or something, or it's I'm going to sell you my book on embodiment via this, you know, and it's kind of like, it's good to understand that that is not embodiment, that is me trying to signal that I'm an embodied person to other people to get attention or likes or appreciation from them. I'm caught up in an addictive behavior, you know. So it's good to understand that embodiment is not a complicated thing, actually. There's books about it and there's a lot of content about it, but most of it is being produced in a sense by the factory, and it's just trying to get more money in, you know, it's just trying to get more money in. So there's not much incentive to make it easy, you know, but, you know, it's more incentive, get them on the course, sell them this, then sell them that, and then use these marketing strategies which will cut into the primary and mid-brain and get them to want more and keep on going, you know, it's like, where actually you could write a book on embodiment and it would only have 4 words in it. Because that's the bottom line. What it really means is feeling my body more. If you close your eyes for a moment and just try and pay attention to the sense of your body. You know, maybe you can feel around your back and your belly, your chest, your front, or maybe there's not so much of it there. Maybe you can feel a vibration or tingling, or maybe not so much. But that's where you're starting from. That's where you're starting from. And then the idea with this kind of therapeutic, body-based therapeutic approach is okay, we want to expand that. We want to expand that. So that instead of being like this person with all these abstract layers and no sense of a body, you've also got this kind of big sense of a body underneath you, which gives you resilience, can keep you healthy when you're old and stuff like that. And the reason it's become kind of blocked is not just the abstract realms, it's because it's related to that. It's like we grow up in a society, you know, like trauma is really big at the minute as well as embodiment. But trauma, working in this field about 20, 25 years, is actually not the big issue. The big issue is social conditioning, parental conditioning. That's actually the big issue. You know, trauma, individual things that have happened to you, obviously that has an effect, especially if you haven't processed them and they're held in your body. And you've learned strategies to not feel that stuff because you want to look okay, to get your needs met, which is normal. But that is relatively minor compared to conditioning. Social conditioning has become all around, you know, you need to be a certain kind of person to get a job, to get a partner, to get friendships. You need to look a certain way on the outside. And so anything which doesn't fit into that, you need to find a way of dealing with that shit just getting it hidden away inside, so that you can create a kind of good-looking front with which to meet the world with. You know, that's where we're kind of at, you know, as a culture. Learning to try and look good on the outside, learning to look like you're embodied, you know. What hacks can I develop to make it look like I'm super embodied, you know, and I'm really peaceful, or like, you know, it's like, or something like that, you know, this kind of thing. And that's where we're at, you know. Our culture is not very developed, you know, it's not. You know, we've got some tech which looks cool, and chimpanzees didn't have that shit, so it's better than them, blah, blah, blah. But basically, we're not developed in a long, big way. You know, we're just taking the first possibility of a step in the right direction, in reality. That's how I see it. After like 400 years of kind of Western cultural dominance, we're just thinking about taking a step into that more embodied realm and starting to understand what is embodiment. So it's super new in reality. And any one of you, if you're motivated to, can become in that field, not by learning lots of ideas, but by understanding how to unlock the body and come back, and, you know, embodying that and starting to bring it out to people. You know, you can do it, because there's very few people doing this, really. In reality, they're mostly just absorbing information and trying to market and get money. Does anyone have a question about all this stuff? I know it's quite a lot if you're not used to any of these kind of theories.
Yeah, I wonder, like, you say that this kind of structure started in the 18th century, and the abstract world started to develop from that time on. And how was it before, in the sense, like, what has actually changed? It's just people that had ideas. As you say, like philosopher and people that bring out ideas about that, or how because embodiment is our natural state, you know. So it was like that before, and then we suppress it with something else. We kind of swap it with something else, and we forgot about that.
No, I don't really see it like that. I don't think that like early culture was necessarily so great.
So it wasn't. There was always conditioning.
There was always some level of conditioning
to fit in. There was always a need to repress some part of yourself. It's just that the abstract.
It's got more and more. Yeah.
More as a.
Yeah. That's a really good point to make, actually, because I'm not trying to say that like.
Before
things were like super wonderful in the 1500s and it was just super cool living then, you know, because it probably wasn't, and you know, but you know, the point is that because this process has kind of kicked off and it's not really under anybody's control, which means no one's really to blame for it, actually. You know, even the people running the big tech companies or factories, they are mostly just captured by the process, and they're just doing what works to maintain themselves in the thing, and if they don't do it, then someone else will be voted in to do it. You know, they're not. No one's really to blame for it, but it is just a problem that we've got in our planet. But yes, you know, the challenge is to you know, use technology positively, not get addicted to it, and to learn to come back to the body. And because we've learned to specifically, you know, try and project at the ages of like 6, 7, 8. Because we're social beings, we tend to want friends to start with. We want friends, you know, around our same age group when we go to school, and we need to fit in with those guys to some degree, you know, and we learn how to do that. A little bit later on, puberty, we start to be interested in sex, in partners, you know, and again, that's another colossal kind of mindfuck, hormones and everything. How do I, you know, attract other people that I'm attracted to, whether it's same sex, opposite sex? How do I do that? Later on, I'll probably get a job or want to have naturally a role in society. These are kind of 3 categories of basic social needs, because we're mammals, primates, that we'll probably experience. You know, how do I fit in and get a job? You know, I want to look good, I want to look competent, I want to be able to impress the boss, or I want to move up the ladder, but I want to do it in a way that people around me think I'm great and not a complete bastard. You know, this kind of, you know, you have all these social complex things going on inside of our brain, you know. But the bottom line is we try to project a personality out into the world, And then when we're on our own, we do things just to try and, you know, deal with all the stuff that we've had to repress ongoingly to maintain that image, you know, that avatar of ourselves in the world, in our social life. So we tend to focus a lot on how our face looks and how the front of our body looks, because that's where we meet the world. And then stuff that doesn't fit in tends to get just shoved in the back, basically. And this happens, it's just happening. You know, people often, I think by the age of about 15, probably don't really feel their lower back. They can't, there's no sensation left in it. And yet your lower back is super important, because if you can feel your lower back, you feel secure. Assuming you're not under immediate threat, you know, you feel secure. You don't need to do a lot of control of your environment, because just in your moment by moment being, hey, I feel my lower back, I can feel sensation and energy there, I'm secure, I'm okay. If you don't feel your belly, you know, your belly is this center where you naturally hold boundaries from. You know, anger is mediated at the belly. Anger is a nervous system response to any perceived sense of invasion. You know, it will create anger. It's trying to push a firm boundary out around you that you can hold. That's its real function. So if you don't feel your belly, and you know, you don't want to be wounded and hurt, you will probably spend a lot of time working out what's going on around you, monitoring everything in your environment, you know, and working out how to stay safe. How do I keep people at a safe distance? How do I keep people like that at a safe distance? When you can feel your belly, you feel more naturally confident just to clearly state a boundary. You know, it's like you can just, it's just there in your sensation. Your backbone, your spine, you know, if you can feel this part of your body, then you just kind of, you can stay upright. You know, you can walk the talk. You know, you can do it without creating a lot of mental rigidity. You know, trying to force yourself to do what you say and say what you do. So a lot of this, the tension that's accruing in this great abstract mind and frontal lobes that we've created, what tends to happen here is they apply a lot of tension on the body. They're applying tension to the body to keep it repressed, under control. They also restrict breathing. That's like super common. If you look at a dog like lying on the beach, it's probably breathing mostly when it's relaxed with its abdominals. You know, and that's kind of common with most mammals, as I understand it. They use these muscles here to breathe with, which might look a bit weird because your lungs are up here. But nevertheless, if you move your abs, your lungs follow. They expand and they contract as you move your abs. And so air comes in and out. If your airways are relaxed, it'll just come in and out. If your mouth's closed, it comes in through your nose. If it's a little bit open, it comes in through your nose and mouth. So if you can actually breathe solely by moving your abdominals, and mammals do this, and it's super relaxing. You know, they're just like, you see a dog just lying there, and it's just kind of like, you know, just super chilled out, you know. It's like, because it's just, and it's not, you know, it hasn't been to some embodiment course or something, you know. It hasn't, you know, it's just doing what its nervous system tells it when it wants to relax, which is just, it's just breathing. You can see its belly moving in and out, and it's just breathing using its abdominals. But for us humans, because we've been trying to, you know, project ourselves out, we restrict our breathing, which means, in practical levels, we start to use the muscles around the throat to kind of suck air in and blow it out again, even as we go about our day. You know, which you would do if you're in a high stress situation or you're down the gym. You will want to get more air into your lungs, but you start to use like the sternocleidomastoid, this muscle here, runs down, clavicle, here on this side, you can probably feel it, particularly if you move your head a little bit forwards. There's this thick muscle, and for many people, you know, it starts to become really tense and armoured because it's just working all the time to kind of breathe with. The scalenes are this kind of triage of muscles that come, three muscles that come down the sides here, you know. You see some people, you know, it's almost like their head is like a kind of Zeppelin hot air balloon, and these muscles are really strong and tense, just trying to hold the head connected to the body. You know, it's like I can be like that at times. You know, it's like there's so much tension in these muscles. They're always trying to control the breathing. People are using their trapezoid, using their pecs to breathe with. Ideally, the muscles we're using to breathe with are the intercostals, which are the muscles between the ribs, you know, which naturally kind of expand and contract the chest. The diaphragm, which is this big kind of bell-shaped muscle around here, you know, that tends to get locked, particularly in people who don't move so much, and the abdominals. You know, these three muscle groups will create healthy breathing. And then if now and again you need to really pump up your breathing and get energy moving, then you use these muscles. But for many humans, you know, they've just, living in industrial culture, we've just learned to become super reliant on all of these muscles. And then people, the latest thing is they fixate on whether they're breathing through the nose or the mouth, you know, which is, you know, it's okay, but like the bigger problem, the elephant in the room, is that your diaphragm's locked and your abdominals are not engaged with your breath. You know, it's a relatively minor thing whether you're breathing in through the nose or the mouth. So we're just starting to learn about this stuff. And likewise, you know, there's a clamping at the throat that comes as the mind tries to keep, you know, the energy, the sensation, the repressed emotions under control so that we can have a nice personality to project into the world. It's blocking at the throat, it's locking up the diaphragm, it's trying to segment the body, basically, to keep all this shit under control. You know, it's like I get it all under control and then I can project my personality out into the world. You know, this is basically what it's doing. This idea of segmental armouring and stuff like that. I don't want to go too massively into it, but the basic thing we're going to be doing in these 3 days is, you know, you'll be learning a little bit about this stuff and how to change it, basically, how to stop it and how to come back to feel the body more. And, you know, you may make big progress in this weekend, you may not, but the thing is, with a lot of these techniques, it's more like you slowly integrate them a bit into your week or your day, and they have an effect over time. So that this kind of approach can work well, you know, if you just dedicate a little bit of time to it each day or each week, you know, it can start to bring you back. So you start to feel your body more. Feel your heart, you know, it's this big center of emotion that makes you feel okay to be vulnerable. You don't have to necessarily control and protect yourself all the time. Chest kind of opens. And some of the principles that we'll be using, you know, one idea is this idea, move, or rather stretch, breathe, feel. This is a super important idea. We'll do some static postures. You did the bow and the arch, you know. You stretch your body in a certain way. And if this was more like just a yoga thing, probably then you just focus on the stretch, just hope you're getting it right and the teacher doesn't come around and embarrass you by telling you you should be moving this or something, you know. But in bio, there's nothing wrong with that, you know, it's a different thing. But in bio, then you also need, okay, I've got to breathe as well. And I've got to feel my body as well. You know, you've got these 3 tasks to do, and those 3 tasks together, what happens is that you're putting certain muscles under a degree of intelligent stress. And as you do that, so the tension in them that's become locked into a muscle starts to vibrate and move, and it starts to come out one way or the other, basically. This is another idea I can talk a little bit about tomorrow, maybe, but right. What happens to the body is it tends to, when we are repressing a lot into it, certain muscles become tense and they don't naturally relax anymore. You know, they just stay tense. We might say, okay, I finished work, just want to relax, but they won't relax, and the mind is still kind of churning along because of it, because it can't re-enter the body. Other muscle groups, maybe the feeling just drops out of them completely for some people, which is a slightly more extreme condition. You know, they don't even haven't got to the tension yet. The feeling has completely gone from them. But with these kind of things, stretch, breathe, feel, you work certain muscle groups, and then they start to release. Afterwards, you can feel more open, you can feel more grounded. Like this, you know, opening up the lower back, you know, stretching some of the muscles around here, and other parts of your body. And you breathe, feel the body. Something starts to slowly move. There's dynamic exercises where you maybe, you know, we'll do all sorts of things this week. I don't want to talk too much because it's quite a lot of information. we'll also work a bit with catharsis, and the idea of catharsis in the next exercise I'm going to do after tea break, which is you start to do a mechanical movement with the body, and maybe if you're lucky, because you can't make your body do this, it'll go at some point into a spontaneous kind of release, where you find your body just kind of takes over and just starts doing it, and it's like, whoa, what the fuck's going on? Because your body knows how to release most of this stuff. It's been so controlled by the mind that it doesn't get the chance. The pelvis in particular, maybe some of you did my classes before with pelvic release, we'll probably do some of that this weekend. At a certain point, you may notice, anybody experience this? The pelvis, fuck man, it's just started moving itself, you know, I'm not telling it to do this, it's just going, because what's happened is the pelvis has become freed up from the mental control, and it's like a little kid got out of prison. Okay, I'm just going to shake the whole body out and just like make it a bit healthy until the mind comes back in and puts it back under control again. You know, it's like, so you got these kind of concepts and ideas. Just learning to open the body, stretch, breathe, feel, and slowly. It's a gradual process. You cannot immediately come back. You know, it can take. I've been doing this shit for like 25 years. You know, and just slowly as you expand the sense of the body, repression goes. Repressed emotions become integrated. You know, you can't really push away a part of your personality. It won't work. It'll just sit there like an angry child, constantly trying to drag itself back in. You have to integrate. And you know, slowly you become more psychologically healthy and more socially functional. Slowly you have more, you can become, you know, you can just go out in the world and be a certain person. You know, it's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with doing that. The problem is when you can't come back afterwards. You know, when your body stays, when your body has started to run that program itself, the brain has conditioned your body to run that personality program, and there's no fluidity in it anymore. You just become that kind of person. You see with older people, generally they get more rigid. Generally they don't get more loose. And Alzheimer's and things like that may be a response to that. But finally it's like, now you get to go a bit gaga and crazy, you know, because like it's so much holding has been going on for so long. Who knows? Anybody got a question or point or just something that they notice or challenge?
Could you give like, I know this is a very broad question there, could you give like a timeline in terms of months or years, like maybe your process actually, how you began to unfold, unravel yourself, and what maybe you've seen in your experience as a person unravelling themselves, maybe having a more balanced and settled nervous system, perhaps, for instance?
I mean, I came from a super traumatised background. Parents left me when I was a baby, and then I was brought up, adopted parents, mixed race, and British Iranian, but you know, I was just brought up with regular white parents, and there was abuse going on in the family as well, basically, and then I also nearly died a couple of times. So I had very heavy different main categories of trauma in early life, and I just was super dissociated from the body and just living in my mind completely. You know, if I look at pictures from myself as a teenager, I'm like super embarrassed. I'm like, oh fuck no, I need to hide that picture. You know? And then I was really dysfunctional. I dropped out when I was 21. And just kind of lived at street level. I was a punk and a squatter. I was super angry about everything, you know, literally whatever you got, I'm going to be fucking angry about it, you know, and protester, anarchist, basically. I was never really super left or right, very anarcho. I lived in squats in the 80s in London. I was a punk. I drifted into criminality in the West End of London in the 90s. I was consuming high amounts of alcohol on a daily basis, you know, and a bit of weed or other drugs as well. Though I was kind of a bit manic, so I didn't really need speed or coke, which was probably lucky. And at some point in the late 90s, I got some clarity somehow that my life was a fucking mess, and if I didn't improve it soon, you know, I was going to die. And people I knew in my age group in my late 30s were dying from alcohol or drug-related problems, particularly just, you know, just being out of it, just too far out of it. And I thought, you know, I just need to take myself out of this social group in the West End that I'm in and find some kind of healing or go on some kind of journey. I didn't know anything about therapy, but I started to go to groups around 1999 and with a guy, Guy Gladstone in London, who's kind of retired now, famous old therapist from the Open Centre in Old Street. And he was doing a bit of bioenergetics and stuff, and it was nice, and I met new people and did a bit, but I just felt like I've got so much inside. You know, so much shit inside. I was extreme case, you know, that I need to do something more radical. And I got a hook into the Osho people, and they were doing some really extreme, much more dynamic meditation, and Varesh and Human University doing the Om meditation. And I thought, this is going to be challenging as fuck, you know, I'm going to be really challenged, but this is what I need to do. And so I just jumped into that work for quite a long time. And then I kind of came out of that, maybe 10 years later, and people have been telling me I should become a therapist now, which I had no intention of before of doing. And I just moved into that, and I was working with a lot of emotional expression stuff, and then I got interested in bioenergetics, which I've been doing a bit. But I see that, you know, I was very dissociated because my mum left me as a baby. I had very little physical, emotional contact with my mother in the first year. It creates huge oral wounding. I was super needy, you know, but what I learned as an adolescent was to cover over neediness, because it is just not. When I became interested in women, straight, I wanted to be attractive to women. Being super needy is just not a good look for me, or it's just not attractive, you know. So I thought, fuck that shit. I need to armor that over and create a good sort of front. I was so dysfunctional, I couldn't do it very well, but I still tried, you know, backed up with a bit of alcohol. You know, I must be able to. You know, I'm not consciously understanding the unconscious. I didn't articulate this process to myself in that way in that time, but that was basically what I was doing, you know. Armouring over all that neediness and trying to rigidly create a front and be and I was still very dissociated from my body. And so taking out the rigidity that I put left me with the neediness, you know, and then I had to start to feel the neediness. The front was removed from a lot of emotional expression in this work. And then the neediness was bare, you know, and it's still deep. And I went through many love relationships where I was still acting quite strong and dominant, which is part of my nature, but also doing things to not feel and show neediness, you know, to not be vulnerable, to maintain control, basically. And that's an ongoing journey for me, you know, coming out of this, what they call leaving pattern or schizoid, where you just, all you do is think. All you do is think, and all the muscles around here are armoured, so your consciousness can't get back in your body, it's stuck. So I had so many kind of groups of trauma, it made, you know, to overcome them and have a just even vaguely healthy social personality, I had to go on a big journey. Other people are different. You know, this is not about writing character structure, this workshop, but that's a way of categorising types of conditioning and how they've affected you, and it can be very useful. So, yeah. Yeah.
When we do the faster breathing, I've obviously heard of breath of fire and how the yogi world describes it. How do you describe it? Why we do it? How does the bioenergetic field describe the point of doing quick breathing?
Well, quick breathing, I mean, it's good to distinguish between breathing that you ideally want to be doing on your normal day. You know, we're not doing breath of fire all day, obviously, or other breathwork techniques, you know. So there's kind of criteria for that, you know, which is often it's quite good to breathe through the nose, try and feel your body more, try and engage your abs or something like that. Now when you're doing a process of breathing for like shamanic reason or therapeutic reason, you might want to get more energy into your body, stir up more free energy. So breathing rapidly can do that. You know, that's like a basic principle in several breathwork forms like rebirthing, holotropic breathwork, various shamanic techniques. With shamanic techniques, a breath of fire is usually more of a shamanic technique. The idea usually is more with shamanic techniques is actually to get the energy in the body so high you leave your body. You actually leave the body and you go and find power animals or some kind of psychic insight in a different realm, you know, and then hopefully come back afterwards, you know. That's the concept with it. With something like rebirthing or holotropic breath work, you know, you're lying down, you just do circular deep breathing. We'll probably do some rebirthing this weekend at some point. And you just do circular deep breathing, you increase the amount of free energy in your body, and it starts to tingle, and it starts to dig into all the repressed stuff. It starts to mobilize repressed emotions, and your body may part and move, or you may feel you need to make sound, it's coming out of you spontaneously. So you're using the breath for a therapeutic purpose. You know, that's important to realize. And those are the kind of theories behind it. It's a shame, a lot of people who work in that field of breath work don't explain it all the time, you know, and it leaves people a bit, they don't realise that they keep it a bit mystical. They want to look like gurus with these mystical techniques, you know. They don't just explain in simple language what you do that for, you know. But with a kind of breath of fire kind of thing, you're charging up particularly the top half of your body to get psychic insights, usually, to come out of the body. So for someone who's got a history of going out and is trying to come back, that may not be useful. In fact, breathwork generally is not so useful for people who have a tendency to leave the body, or it's a bit of a risk for them. They may simply just go out quite quickly, and that they don't have much control over it. It's their nervous system, it's not their fault. You know, it's just their system's taking them out of the body, and then they're actually kind of in a different world while they're doing this deep breathing, so they're not really feeling the body, they're not really processing very much. That's an issue that gets talked about a bit these days, you know, because breathwork has become quite prevalent, you know, and people, but there is an issue with it for certain. For other people, super rigid people who are just working corporate, breathwork can be very useful, you know, because it's pumping up their energy and it's starting to break the rigidity and they can feel their heart more. They're less machine-like. People who leave the body, it's not always the best thing to do because it can take them further out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd love to be able to take this and explain this to clients and people who aren't familiar with even the term embodiment. Obviously we're all here for this. What would be the best hook? Like, to me it would seem like just talking about lower back pain and how we can normalise that in society. And everyone thinks it's to do with sitting at a desk, which it is, but it's also because there's pre-tension in the body. Would that be a good place? Would be any other hooks you would use with people who aren't embodied at all, people just go through the motions in life?
I mean, it's not, you know, I don't know so much about that. I tend to just start talking and see what comes out. You know, that's a bit my approach, to be honest, but that's a totally valid question. I think we tend to attract clients that resemble us in some way. As an adopted kid, I noticed at some point that way more than average adopted kids, I didn't know this in advance, were actually coming to my workshops. They didn't know I was adopted. I didn't know they were until there's no sharing or discussion in the workshop. We you know, it's people who've been drug addicts or who've worked corporate and have got super rigid and then kind of had meltdowns and burnout. You know, they tend to be good at working with those kind of guys. So that generally applies in these kind of therapeutic and coaching things. It's useful.
Yeah.
Anybody else got something you want to say? What's the time, everybody?
10:40.
Okay.
Just a quick question
Yeah.
about abstract thinking and Descartes, I think therefore I am. Do you think that's slowing down a bit? Because it just seems to me that people are thinking less independently because they're relying on AI and ChatGPT and, you know, and all these things, or even regurgitating things which already exist. Do you think it's just naturally starting to slow down a little bit?
I mean, it's just my opinion, but probably I think what's happening is with the rise of Web 2 social media and interactive, you're starting to get like opinion silos, they call it sometimes, online, where people take different political positions, you know, and gather together with other people of the same position, and then they try to attack certain people or whatever, you know, left or right.
Echo chambers.
Yeah, so you've got this echo chamber kind of effect going on, where people who fundamentally see themselves as weak, you know, in a vast society of billions of people, think, okay, if I gather together with loads of other people with the same opinion, then I will experience power, and then I can create positive changes in the world, or that's usually, you know, get rid of the bad guy here, or whatever. I think that has taken over from, you know, it's generally kind of felt that there's not so many polymaths and geniuses around these days, that the society has become, in the last 20 years, much more about, you know, finding your political position, sitting in that, and kind of, you know, getting this very rigid, abstract world, you know. Like with me, you know, if I listen to a right-wing politician who's good, I kind of think, yeah, he's right, man. He's like, you know, and then I listen to a left one, and then I think, yeah, she's totally right, you know. You know, I can't, it's hard for me to hold a really solid position all the time, you know, which is not, maybe partly me anyway, but it's partly because I've done the inner work, so I get moved around by my meetings with people. You know, if they're a good speaker or if they're sincere, then I kind of get sucked in a little bit to what they say and I kind of follow it. But I think it's generally true that we're lacking, everything's become very streamlined. I remember when Google was little and they were like this super exciting company with loads of amazing ideas, and then they just became this big corporate monolith, just a few corporate monoliths just controlling the whole scene. That's what happened. All the polymaths and the geniuses disappeared. And do you fit into this cog accurately enough? Can you be the cog in the machine? It's become like that, I think. I guess that's how I see it. So I don't know that the system is necessarily correcting itself. It may be over time. Even concentrating wealth into the hands of like 10 people worldwide could be a positive thing if they then, dismantle the whole kind of hierarchical structure and create an amazing thing. It could be, or it could be just like a massive and fucking nightmare where everyone dies basically, except for them, and they go and live on Mars or something. It's like, that is also possible. It's like. Anyone else? Please ask if you've got a question about any breathwork, bio.
So with the mouth and nose thing,
Yeah.
is there a specific reason why we're encouraged to use, I know we can use any, but more encouraged to use the mouth? Like biologically, is there a reason, physiologically?
Recently, what people more I've seen talking about using the nose to breathe.
Exactly, yeah, that's why I'm wondering why you say to use the mouth.
Well, it's more for therapeutic reasons, rather than just all day long or something like that, If you're doing a therapeutic process where you want to bring more energy into the core of your body, you will get more volume of air in if you use your mouth. So, that's not to say, okay, when you go back and you're working at your computer or you're trying to meditate, then you can go back to nasal breathing. But when you've got a specific therapeutic process that you're trying to do, like for example, you wouldn't, just put your body like this if you wanted to relax. Most people would not do that, They would sit in a sofa or have a nice warm bath. But doing this, nevertheless, because you're stretching certain muscles and breathing and feeling, it can create a sensation of release, and later you feel more relaxed. And in similar manner, by using the breath like this to increase the charge of energy in the body, so it's good to distinguish between what you do in therapy and what you would do in your normal life. Yeah? Yeah.
Can I ask you something?
There's a chap here, sorry to speak to you, but get
Yeah,
Thank you. So with the breathing, because I think I relate to you about going up and out of the body with the breathing, whereas I find the body one's much more grounding and also expansive. But there's some that constriction I talked about in my sort of subject there. So when doing these breathing patterns, it feels very limited how far I can breathe, because I'm having to breathe quickly again and again and again. It's a short breath and it thuds up against the resistance because of my held breathing pattern. And I'm just wondering how to work with that when I'm doing it. Is there a way? Do I just do that, or do I, instead of do I slow down and do every other beat, or I'm just wondering whether that could help, or whether actually I should just focus on the more physical stuff for a while and then come to the breathing later when my body's opened up a bit more.
If you look at that, I think you did the intense belly breathing workout this morning, in that thing, which was something I created myself. But it's like the idea behind it is not just to increase your level of ventilation, the amount of oxygen you get in, but also to really work the abdominals, because if you can get the abdominals really moving, there's so much tension and energetic blocks in this part of the body, they will start to clear out. It can be really intense. But you get the abdominals really moving, you start to clear that out. It also works the diaphragm, this big muscle around here, and can start to unlock it. If you have a tendency to dissociate and you see yourself coming out of the body a lot, it's probably not the right technique for you, and you do need to do just something else to get a little bit more in first before you can make use of it.
I don't know how much I disappear. All I know is that I feel pretty spaced out and ungrounded. It's not a very nice feeling, because I'm sort of more up in my head actually, and then thoughts come. Because I'm not grounded down in my belly. Do you think perhaps just do the other stuff and for a while and then come back to the breath work.
Yeah, or there's a version of that workout. You see, breathwork is a different thing, really, because most breathwork is more about getting more air into your system. You know, that's what's driving the therapeutic effect. Whereas this is about, it's got that in it, but it's also really about getting the abdominals moving.
Right.
So that tends to keep people a bit more in the body, but still, if you are a lever, it will, but basically do other stuff, because there's not actually so much you can do to stop leaving. You know, there's a little bit where you can say, okay, I'm really leaving now, try and come back. But also it's kind of mediated by your nervous system, and there isn't necessarily so much you can do.
And what's the best thing to try and you convert from being a lever to a remainer?
I think you can work at the throat, you know,
Yeah.
and you can work to try and try and open up the throat. Generally, leaving people want to make rapid progress. You know, they tend to be quite high function, especially if they're leaving in a bit rigid. And you know, they're always looking for a hack as well and stuff like that. I'm like that, you know. But they have to learn to work slowly and really value their emotions, value the sense of the body, generally, if you're strong in leaving, until you can really learn to stay in the kind of process and just be in your body and just feel your body, you know. And then, and it will happen. It will happen. There's also, I was going to say, a gentle version of this workout where it's a bit, you don't use the rapid part of it, you just do it, the in and out one, longer and slower.
Right, maybe
I can show that's on YouTube as well.
Right, and I get what you mean about exercising those abdominal muscles.
Yeah.
I really felt that as like a real workout, and that probably needs strengthening, doesn't it? As well as working through.
It's clearing out.
Clearing
It's
out.
trying to get there's this kind of idea of a primal knot. You know, the belly is the energetic core of a primate body. You know, it's where you hold boundaries from. It's where you access a lot of energy, and it's. Now, many Westerners who come to groups like this are open at the heart and they're open at the mind, but they're usually locked down here, and then they have to be in a very rarefied environment all the time. You know, where because they need sympathetic, harmonious people around them all the time. They don't have access to the belly because they can't naturally hold boundaries. And working at the belly tends to be the most grungy and the most self-facing and the difficult bit.
When you are working with the belly, because what I feel sometimes is like with that breathing, I'm actually adding tension on top of tension. And is that actually going to help clear out, or just add another layer of tension?
It's very. I don't think it's going to add another layer of tension. It's the same as doing these stretches. You know, you are making your body tense. Well, this one is a really good one for levers. This is a great one. Pulling your shoulders up towards your ears. You are tensing certain groups of muscles, but because you're breathing and feeling as well,
you're also relaxing.
They're starting to release stuff from those muscles, so that later on, this is the classic kind of, the lever often classically has got these raised shoulders and a slightly shocked look, or something like that. You don't look like a classic lever, by the way. You don't look like, anyway. They're not all the same anyway, but like, you know, and then exacerbating that, actually making it worse, can have a therapeutic benefit.
Thank you.
Same with that.
I mean, you already answered some aspects of it. What I wanted to say about embodiment, if we think holistically, even our higher, you know, like the third eye, the crown chakras, how do they get involved holistically by integrating them into the work? Because they're still part of our body. I know that we use them to leave, but there must be a way to just integrate them and feel them, because if I go ahead in life, I need still to touch those insights that comes from those higher realms. I don't need to shut them off completely.
Yeah, but I think there's you know, when you work lower down the system, you know, I mean, like, because living here a long time among spiritual people, you know, and going to Glastonbury and places like this, you know, with a lot of kind of spiritual people around, it's clear that a lot of people who became really spiritual, they had certain trauma and stuff like that, and they really struggled to create a coherent self to get those basic needs met. You know, it was difficult for them. And then, you know, some spiritual thing came in, third eye opened or whatever, and they became spiritual, and they discovered that now they could get some kind of kudos and status and things like that, and whatever, as a spiritual being. But the challenge is to really work lower down the system, and energy will rise, you know, Hindu idea, you know, this arising up through the chakras. It's more, you know, if you can get your belly really working, you know, it will come up. You know, I was involved in Kabbalah like 25 years ago, which is a mystical tradition, Judeo-Christian, you know, and then I just dropped it. I got into Osho, got super into therapy, just worked with all my staff and mum and dad and blah, blah, blah. And then in the last year or two, I just got really interested in Kabbalah again, you know. It's just, it comes back, you know. When something opens inside of you, it'll come back. You know, I wasn't planning that or looking at it. I just suddenly used to get old streams of thought and remember all sorts of weird stuff from the school I was in. You know, and I thought, wow, it's like coming back. You know, there is some process which will happen naturally inside. Particularly if you've had some kind of awakening experience in when you were younger or whatever. You know, you can really work lower down the system, and when it's right, when you've cleared the stuff, you will naturally come, energy will naturally come, yeah, I'm sure. Anybody else?
I'd like to mention, I used to go to the Open Centre
Mhm.
and work with Guy Gladstone. I had a body therapist for a while,
Mhm.
and what I found is important, and it's the challenge, is you know, release is one thing, but expression of what has been released is another part. It's a whole other challenge, and that's something that I've found.
You mean talking about it, or you mean making sound, or?
No, more making a difference in my life.
Okay.
So if let's say I have a childhood pattern of holding which has been laid down over years and becomes, you know, part of your personality, and then you forget about it, and then at some point you think, hang on, there's something not quite right, like you've described with your own journey, and then often at that point people find they get drawn into therapy and doing this kind of work. But as you start unpacking that, it's what you do with that energy. You have to, when you go out into the world, you have to make a change. So like if you've been a doormat, you have to behave differently with other people, because the energy that's locked up and then is freed actually belongs out in the world. And the whole process of suppressing that energy was done in relationship to other people through, you know, the early years of your childhood, in relation with your parents and your teachers and so on. So that's what I find is the challenging part of the work, making a difference.
Yeah, that's a really good point there. I mean, how I see it working is like, say with someone who's been a doormat, you know, someone who just lets other people take advantage of them, says, oh, Mr. Doormat. It's not really one of them, but like kind of what's happened in a sense, maybe they've got oral or endura type wounding, and there's a big charge of energy somewhere probably lower down around the belly about holding boundaries, you know. That charge is locked in their system, and to not contact anger, which their nervous system is calibrated as dangerous, they learn to be submissive. And they're at work, the boss knows, if I really need to get some people to work another hour tonight, I can hit that one and hit that one because they won't complain, you know, they'll just do it. You know, they're in relationships, they're a bit submissive, you know, their girlfriend is bossing them around again, and yeah, babe, I'll do it, you know, don't worry, you know, whatever. You know, they've got, and that's hell because they don't want to feel the anger, not necessarily psychologically, it may just be their nervous system has locked it off and assigned it as dangerous, as life-threatening. That can happen. You know, it's complex, but it can happen. They go and do therapy, they clear 80-90% of this stuff out, so they no longer need to avoid anger, and in fact they're starting to get quite angry, but what can happen is they're still caught up in this mental behaviour. You know, they've learned to be the doormat, you know, and so the boss is coming. Generally, it changes to a degree naturally, and to a degree you need to take a new position. If 80-90% of that is gone, and you're back in at work, and the boss is like, oh, come on, Cheryl, we've got another hour tonight, sorry, you know, but I know I can rely on you, and they're like, no, fuck this shit, you know, they have a fight, and like, they may well even overreact, you know, like, fuck you and your company, I'm not fucking doing that shit, man, I'm not your fucking slave, you know, or whatever, you know, because the charge of energy is now coming up, you know, but it can still be the case that they start to go along with the old behaviour. Someone with low self-esteem never approaches people they're attracted to because they're afraid of rejection in some way. You know, the old behaviours come up, but there's no charge underneath them anymore. If you've got 80-90% of that out, the charge is not there. And so it's easier to just do something different. That's usually how it works, if you've got enough of the charge out. And sometimes what you see, particularly in the New Age scene, is people try to affirm to themselves that they've completely healed certain wounds, and yet it's clear in their behaviour that they're still going on, you know, because they haven't totally been. In fact, generally, when anyone says to you in a therapy group, as a workshop leader, you know, I don't need to do the mother session because I've completely healed all my wounds with my mother. You know that person certainly hasn't, but I mean, because you don't know, because it's, I don't have a way of accessing someone's inner world, but you know, it's highly unlikely that they have. They've just kind of created this self-image of being someone who's healed all their wounds or something, you know. It's like but it's not real. The body keeps the score. The body knows the truth. You know, you can posture and create images. You can put all the embodiment memes on social media you like, but your body's there saying, "Dude, I don't think so." You know, it's like, you know, it knows the truth. You know, it's like, and when you go out into society, you see the truth. You know, yeah. Anyway, I'm just going on a bit now. Does anyone have a question that's they're busy with? Okay. So have a big breath out, breathe all this weird information and shit. And we're going to have what's the time now?
It's 11 now.
Let's have a 20-minute tea break, and we're going to come back and do something exciting and challenging. Yeah.